afternoon. My name is Clay Eels. I'm honored to be here. I've known Brian for 15 years. The reason for getting to know him was a book that I did on singer-songwriter Steve Goodman. Brian was a huge help with that book, and I could talk a lot about Brian, but I'm not going to, because my segment here is quite long in itself. This is Brian's own words, and it's very appropriate. We had a song about friendship before this because that's the theme of this. And I want to take you back about a year ago. Brian this story is about something that transpired in 2013 and early 2014. And he and I were talking on the phone, and I'm from Seattle, and I was encouraging him to put together this story for something like Sing Out Magazine. And so we worked on this together. I interviewed this out of him. This is in first person. These are all his words. It never got published, so this is the first time it's really had a public audience. And I hope you bear with me. It is a little long. But fortunately, we have Dan Maher right afterward to wake you up. So in the end, it all comes down to friendship. I learned this once again while putting together a book of songs and photos to honor Art Thiem, a mainstay of the Chicago folk scene from the 1960s to the 1990s. Now, Art Thiem is still around. He lives in Illinois, but he can't play or sing anymore. For years, multiple sclerosis has kept him from gripping a banjo or a guitar. In the last couple of years, I flew in from Moscow, Idaho, several times to see Art in his nursing home. Last summer, I moved back to Chicago just to be closer to Art. Now, Art Thiem was never a household name, but he was the real deal. He wasn't overly shined or super polished. He was the closest thing to Woody Guthrie or Pete Seeger that Chicago has ever seen. He had all the songs anyone who wanted to be a folk singer should have, and 100 more than you were supposed to learn. He was in that old school, and he played the banjo like nobody. He had a unique sound with a soft frailing and very interesting percussion. Beyond all that, Art was my mentor. He was the most sharing person. He was like a University of Folk singer. His songs were American, and they were all about truth. And when you're going through your early 20s, when I got to know Art, I think you're looking for as much truth as you can handle. Now, I first got involved in music because I heard Pete Seeger singing about the Vietnam War when I was being drafted. So music, to me, from the beginning, was not about dancing, it was about truth and honesty. So when I saw Pete in 3 of Art's photos, it gave me the idea to mail a draft of the Art Thiem songbook to Pete to make any corrections that he wanted. I sent it off in June of 2013. I didn't have high expectations. I knew that Pete was busy at this time of life. Everybody's giving him awards every day, which happens to these elderly heroes that we have. Then I heard that Pete's longtime wife and partner, Toshi, died the next month, on July 9th. Surely I would not hear from Pete soon. But late that month, I got a fateful phone call from Pete. I missed it, but he left a message. He spoke slowly with plenty of space between the words, just as you heard a few minutes ago. Brian, this is Pete Seeger calling. I've gone through the songbook carefully, making a few corrections, and I hope you'll call me. Do hope you'll get in touch with me. I'm ready to mail back my corrected version of your truly, and then it cut off, truly wonderful songbook. Thank goodness I didn't have my phone in my pocket, because that meant I had a beautiful message to give to Art. And when Art heard that, boy, talk about lifting his spirits. Wow, he said, Pete Seeger, he thinks this is a wonderful songbook. I didn't think I was that important. Well, I called Pete back, and right away Pete invited me to the annual Corn Festival of the Beacon Sloop Club, set the next month on August 11th. in the Riverfront Park near Pete's home. "Why don't you just come out to the festival and we'll go over that book," Pete said. Well, I had just paid my first month's rent and security deposit, and I had only a $900 cushion. But this was 94-year-old Pete Seeger inviting me to spend a little time with him. My mind kept going, well, you've got to do it. Oh, but I'll be broke when I get back. Well, that's okay, you just have to do it and everything will work out. You can't pass up the invitation, so you just have to do it. So I told Pete, okay, I'm more than halfway there. I just drove 2,200 miles to get to Illinois, and I could drive another 900 to come to the festival. So after the call, my left brain kept kicking in. To go broke, to use up your savings, is no fun. It's a scary thing. But I've been living like that my whole life, so I just had to do it. A few days later, a big package came in the mail, and it was from Pete. He'd gone through the art-themed songbook page by page and made changes on about 20 songs. He even caught a spelling error. Amazing. Well, on pages with the lyrics to Woody Guthrie's "This Land Is Your Land," Pete had added in clear red pen 2 verses that I had mistakenly left out, including the one about the private property sign. Next to that one, he had written, "Art, you left out the best verse." He also had a layout suggestion for me. "Squeeze a little, you can get all the verses in. Old Pete." And on the title page, he was even more encouraging. "Brian, this is a great songbook. Check my corrections in red. Find a good publisher. Large type, simple chords, no music. Get some quotes for the back cover. I'll give you one. Old Pete." Well, I made all the changes that Pete marked throughout the whole book, except for one. For Woody Guthrie's famous Union Maid, you know this song, "Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union." Pete had drawn a big X over a verse that he said had been written not by Woody, but by Millard Lampell of the Almanac Singers back in 1941. Now, the crossed-out verse urged women to marry a Union man and join a ladies' auxiliary. Not exactly a 21st century concept. "Faith Ward has 6 better verses," Pete had written in red. Now, this is a puzzle. I had not heard of Faith Ward and couldn't find her on the internet, but I could ask Pete about that in person. So I rented a car and I arrived about noon the day before the festival on a Saturday. Once I was in town, I checked into a motel and I called Pete. "You made it," he said. "Oh boy, that's a drive." He told me to meet him the next morning at the park and to ask the president of the sloop club to guide me. "You won't be able to park close, but he'll tell you where I parked my car. I park it way off to the side. If I have to talk to somebody and it's important, we have to go in my vehicle so we can be alone." So I told him I'd be walking around with my banjo and keeping an eye out for him. The next morning, the sun was shining on the Hudson. The festival was starting. People were rolling in. I slung my banjo on my shoulder and lugged along a large bag with the drafts of the songbook. I was excited by the prospect of talking with Pete, but it was not the first time I had crossed paths with him. I had met him on the Clearwater sloop when it was in dock at Croton on Hudson in 1973. 11 years later, I had met him again in Chicago, and I had mentioned these times in my initial letter to him, which may have been some way of giving me some credibility, but I doubt that he recalled them. I mean, how many times had he heard that from thousands of others like me? So as I walked through the festival, a woman walked up to me. "Are you Brian?" "Yes." "Well, I heard about you. Pete was talking about you. He's looking for you. He's got on a blue shirt and a tan hat." "Well, thanks." Minutes later, a man with a video camera came up to me and said much the same thing. Not long afterward, I walked past a booth and a woman there said, "Are you the guy who drove 900 miles to see Pete?" "Yeah." "Okay, Pete said he's looking for you and he's trying to find you. He's walking out that way." Clearly, Pete had told at least a few people that I was coming. I kept walking, and about 1:30 I spotted him in a paisley flower shirt talking with a woman. I walked on over, and this is classic Brian. I walked on over, playing my long neck banjo, and he turned to me. And I started singing one of his latest songs. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Any of you heard this one? We stood there and sang a verse or two, and the woman next to Pete, was beaming. And I stuck out my hand and I said, Pete, I'm Brian. I made those 900 miles. And with a big grin, he said, now we have to go somewhere where we can talk privately. Come on, we got to go this way. Lead the way, I said. And we walked across the park. There was a girl swinging on a swing. Pete stopped, turned toward her, and started to sing a song that I didn't know. I learned later that it was a children's tune, Under the Lilacs. The chorus went, chinga chinga, chinga chinga, ching ching ching, and it fit the girl's rhythm on the swing. The song was about a man who deceives a woman and goes to hell. It was a serious song, but it was lighthearted in a way, and Pete sang it like a nursery rhyme. So I joined in, and we stood there singing and watching this girl swing really high. When he finished the song, we kept on walking. So Pete, how are you feeling today? Well, Brian, I'll give you my stock answer. If I could remember, I'd tell you. And we laughed and we continued on. Every minute or so, someone would walk up and greet him and thank him and ask him to pose for a photo and sign something. This is why we have to go to my car, Pete told me. Then he said to me 4 times in a row, can we have our picture taken with you? Can we have your autograph? Can we have your picture taken with you? Can we have your autograph? Can we have your picture taken with you? Can we have your autograph? Can we have your picture taken with you? Can we have your autograph? And then he paused. After a while of that, he said, I'm fit to be hogtied. He suddenly stopped and looked around like he was lost, and then he got his bearings, and we slowly walked along a winding, shady path. He stooped down to pick up a piece of litter on the ground. A few steps farther, he stepped down to pick another piece up. Let me get that one for you, I said. Well, you've got your banjo and a book bag to carry. That's okay, I can get down there a little faster than you, I said. So there we were, strolling through the park, picking up paper and bottle caps and candy wrappers. At the end of the walkway, we put it all in a big trash can. Pete then realized that he needed the keys to his car and said his daughter had them. Do you have one of those digital phones, he asked. And I said yes, and I pulled it out, and as he called out the number, I dialed it, and his daughter was at the car and told us to come along. I was thinking it'd be a big 1940 Chevy or something, but it was a big black SUV. He had me put my banjo in the back. He climbed into the driver's seat. I sat on the passenger side, and we started going through the book. I like the big print, he said. This way 3 or 4 people can see it. And he paged through it carefully and he asked, did you make the changes I suggested? Yes, all but one, I said. I couldn't find any information on the verses of Union May from this person you wrote down, Faith Ward. Oh, I made a mistake. Not Faith Ward, Faith Petrick. Sorry, thanks for the correction, Ben. Petrick. Instantly, the name rang a bell. She had founded the San Francisco Folk Music Club, and when I lived in San Francisco for a year and a half in the 70s, I had visited Faith's home. She's the one, Pete said. She's older than me even. Brian, I think she's 98. He asked for a pen, and so I gave him my red one, and next to the ladies' auxiliary verse that he had crossed out, he wrote, no good. Next to his sentence about Faith's verses, he wrote, get up. Then he began to write a verse to the Union May. He printed like a grade schooler, very slowly and in tiny letters, and halfway through he stopped writing. He turned his eyes to me and he said, I'm losing my mind. I was speechless. What could I say? Anything would sound trivial compared to what he had just said. I mean, the standard joke, the one that Art Thiem often cracked, is, well, when your memory goes, forget it. But humor was not in the air. Things were slipping by him, and he could see it happening. His voice had no cheer, and I detected fear in his tone. I felt terribly sad for him. Well, he finally finished printing the verse, and we sang together once through the whole verse, and then again, for good measure. and he turned through more pages. He started singing a verse of a Gaelic tune that I couldn't make out half the lyrics for. Then he sang an English translation, sang another verse, then its translation, then another, and another. He noticed I printed out children's verses that his wife Toshi had written for Turn, 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 and he made a few changes. I asked him if he remembered a benefit that he and Art, along with Steve Goodman, did for Michael Cooney in 1979 in Chicago, and he gazed off to the side. No response. Then he turned and said, "Are you familiar with violin repertoire?" "Well, a little bit." He said, "Do you remember this solo?" And then he named an opera by Verdi, whose name escapes me. He whistled a violin part from it. He couldn't really whistle, but he hummed the pitch as he blew the air out, and the melody was faint. And after a little bit, it became familiar to me. The conversation meandered, and the time passed, and I just didn't comprehend the time. I mean, when you're in the zone, there's just no time. And at one point, the red pen still in his hand, Pete started to lean forward, little by little, until his head nearly touched the steering wheel. For a moment, I thought he was dying in front of me. I was thinking, oh my God, this is not the time. Lord, don't let him die right now. And when his head touched the steering wheel, he jerked back, and I realized he had been nodding off and falling asleep. And the second he pulled himself back up, I was so relieved. I said, "You know, Pete, you need a nap right now." "Yeah, I need a nap." "Okay, I'm going to let you take your nap." And I picked up my bag, and then I remembered something I had promised to do. "Pete, can we call Art Thiem right now? Can you just say hello to him?" "Yeah, call him up," he said. I dialed Art, but he wasn't in his room. I found out later he was in the lobby waiting for a friend to arrive and set up speakers so that Art could talk with Pete. So I didn't get to connect the two, but the songbook had already lined them up anyway. I got out of Pete's car and he said, "Don't forget your banjo now, it's in the back." When I opened up the trunk, he said, "Let me see that banjo again." Now he wanted to read the inscription on it, on the head. It's a tribute to his own famous inscription, which was based on the Woody Guthrie inscription. His inscription said, "This machine surrounds hate and forces it to surrender." Well, on mine, I had printed in colored pencil, "This machine transforms fear into courage and hope through the power of song." "Can I play that?" he said. "Well, you got to take a nap." "Yeah, but I want to play the banjo." And so I came around to the driver's side. He was still sitting in the car, and he opened the door, and I handed him the banjo. His alertness was back. I stood next to him, and with our heads about 5 inches apart, he said with a twinkle, "Do you know this one?" "And though it's darkest before the dawn." "Sure, I know that one. I know all your songs," I said. It was quite early morning, one of Pete's most inspiring songs. And I started singing harmony, and it sounded great. I tell you, if I could have experienced just 3 minutes with Pete that day, those would have been the 3 minutes, the two of us singing together. It was just so beautiful. Then an idea struck him. "You know that other song you played earlier?" He's referring to God's Counting on Me. "I usually play this part on the downbeat," and he started strumming. And when I played the song for him earlier, it was with an upbeat, so he had caught that. He showed me a couple more banjo riffs, and then he started to sing. "God's counting on me, God's counting on you." And again we sang together. What a feeling standing there, leaning up against the car, just two of us in an old-timer moment, harmonizing in the sunlight. He wasn't making mistakes. He wasn't forgetting a thing. He was singing perfectly. The moment we finished the song, an arm swung around in front of me, and it was Pete's daughter with a plate of corn on the cob. It was my cue to leave. I hadn't realized it, but I had just spent an hour in the car with Pete Seeger. I said goodbye and walked back to the festival. It felt just like a dream. I was just floating. The sunlight and the colors were brilliant, and I had some private time with one of my great heroes in the world. It was like a little slice of heaven. 20 minutes after leaving Pete, a call came in on my phone. It was my friend in Illinois. "I just got here and I'm sitting with Art. I got the speakers hooked up. When are you going to see Pete?" But it was too late. We had to let that go. Later that day, Pete performed in a grassy meadow backed by shade trees in the Hudson, mostly as backup to other musicians. And after the show, I walked up to Pete. He was surrounded as usual. Between autographs, though, I caught his eye, and I shook his hand, and I thanked him for spending some time with me on behalf of our team. "I've got to drive 900 miles to get back home," I said, and he smiled. "Okay, Brian." Monday morning, I left Beacon at 4:30 and drove straight to Illinois, and I only stopped to nap for 2 hours at a rest stop. And the next day, I picked up the phone and I looked up the San Francisco Folk Music Club, and a woman answered, and I described the art theme songbook and Pete's admonition that I talk with faith to secure the better verses to Union Maid. I asked if I could leave a message for her. "Well, you know what," the woman said, "I'm just going to give you Faith's number in a hospice." Hospice. The word hit like a hammer, but I had to persevere. When hospice is involved, you cannot delay anything. I dialed her at Coming Home Hospice, and she picked up. She sounded spunky, alert, and sharp. She remembered our theme. She said she would be happy to review the songbook. So I mailed her the original draft with color copies so that she could see Pete's red ink. I also wrote Pete a letter letting him know that Faith was in hospice, along with how to reach her by phone. And a week later, I called Faith again. "Oh yes, I got the songbook," she said, "and I see Pete's handwriting. Wow, that's a great songbook. I see that Pete wants me to get you the verses to Union Maid. I can't jump out of bed right now and run to the post office, but I will make sure I send the lyrics to you as soon as I can. I will get them to you." "Okay," I said, "thanks so much." And 1 month went by, and then another, and then came the news from a friend. Faith Petrick had died on October 24th, 2013. Right away, I wrote Pete a note about Faith's passing. And not knowing what else to do, I let another couple of weeks go by. But then I called the San Francisco Folk Music Club again, and this time a young man answered. He told me, "I'll keep an eye out for those lyrics." 2 weeks later, he called back. He said that Faith's daughter had made available to him her mom's computer, and he had found a document with 8 verses to Union Maid, complete with typed and handwritten notes about who wrote which verses, including verses by Faith herself. The oddest thing about this was the place where the document was located on Faith's computer, in its digital trash can. But this was a true find because union busting is still a reality, and the song is pretty timely, especially from a woman's point of view. So soon after I received Faith's lyrics, I revised Union Maid in the songbook, and on November 22nd, 2013, I sent it to Pete. I included a revised cover and asked his okay to use it. On the bottom of the cover, I wrote, "Final edit by Pete Seeger." 2 months passed, and I didn't hear from Pete. Then we all learned of Pete's death on January 27th, 2014. 1 week after, this is when he's writing this, 1 week afterward, it's great to know that the songbook was one of the last projects that both Pete and Faith had worked on. But I have several questions still. Did Pete ever contact Faith in hospice? How did Faith's verses for Union Maid end up in her computer's trash? Did Pete ever see the final version of the art theme songbook? There are no answers to those questions. But there's no question that the songs will live on, and this is fueled by our common mortality and by the power and truth and honesty of folk music and the power of friendship.